Hi, everybody. It's Joe Chaffee on this Sunday as we take a look at what's going on weather-wise, and it's still, of course, fairly quiet and uneventful. There are no really big storms going on anywhere. You got a lot of energy out in the Pacific. It's all sort of locked away. Weather systems that are coming across are relatively weak, and you have this troughing here in the eastern states that continues to just kind of hold control and send shots of cold air down. We're seeing one that's moving in today, and for Monday, nothing exceptional, just keeping temperatures a little bit below normal. And then the ridge builds here in the eastern states, and you can already see another trough starting to line up for the midweek period. And I'll outline it for you. You can see it's right about there. There's a weak system on the southern tail end of it that's moving east, and you have colder air that's coming down on the west side of the trough. You've got still all this energy locked up in the Pacific, and in the meantime you do have a bit of a ridge that builds up in southwestern Canada, actually more in the interior than along the coast, where the flow is mostly coming out from the southwest. So it's really nothing here that says anything with regards to any kind of major storm development, but that trough lines up along the east coast and then pulls out. But then you can see there's another area that's about to take hold up in here, and that's going to be the cold shot that comes down for next weekend. And there's a system that runs out ahead of it here in the Gulf of Mexico that moves off the southeast coast and then tracks out northeastward offshore with no consequence to the regular weather here going into the weekend, other than it turns cold. And you can see how deep this trough is, but the mean positions of these upper air systems are too far out to the east. You have a mean trough that's out in the west that's still sitting here, and the flow across Canada is still pretty much westerly, so you don't have any kind of polar connection going through next week. And this is what I would often refer to as do-it-yourself cold air, where you have a strong upper air cyclone that generates its own cold air. But it's a pretty decent shot for this time of year, and it's going to mean for cold temperatures next weekend and into the first part of next week. Now, as far as the longer term, we keep advertising this idea of the second half of November, and this afternoon's GFS model run kind of goes along with this. If you watch what happens in Canada, you start to get some major changes after about day 7 or 8. So that it's coming into range, now inside 10 days makes it a little more encouraging in terms of the confidence of the forecast. But you can see what happens here in the east. You get a bit of a cyclone that develops. It looks like the mean trough is going to shift a little bit to the west. The Pacific breaks down, which is important, and you start to get a ridge that builds up in the western states. So that's a big important change in the longer term. And what the model does this afternoon is it basically overwhelms the eastern part of the United States with cold air as we go into the latter part of the period. Now, whether this is real or not remains to be seen, but I just want to show you here when you have how different the flow is at the end of the period, if this were to be real, as opposed to the beginning, because now you basically have some semblance of a polar connection coming down across from the north, from Siberia and down into Canada. But the amount of cold air here is not a lot. This is not January, of course, but it is significant to see something like this in terms of the pattern for the eastern states for the second half of the forecast period, because it does mean for colder temperatures. Now, the other part of this equation, of course, is going to be the precipitation, and that is a different ball game here altogether. So if we look at, we're going to look at the United States now, and when we move it across, there really isn't any big, there aren't any big indications here of any kind of breakdown in the drought pattern. You have these weak weather systems that move through. Wednesday's system doesn't do anything in terms of showers. And even Saturday's, the arrival of the cold air on Friday that builds in for the weekend comes in rather uneventful in terms of precipitation, although I would expect the lake effect snow machines to get turned on in upstate New York. There's some snow being generated there. And when we move forward, you have another weather front toward the end of next week. Now, this is the one that starts the process of overwhelming cold air. And you can see, it has cold air that comes into the United States. But again, there are no big storms being indicated. And frankly, if the model were showing big storms, I would be highly skeptical at this point for anything that's beyond the day 7 period. Now, the European model today was a little different. It doesn't go out far enough. It kind of has the same idea, but it got a little bullish here in a different sort of way. Let's see if this winds up being correct. But the European, as we go out to days 7 through 10, wants to pile energy down into the Gulf states, and you can see it here. Let me just get the pen going so we can take a look. It's got a very wrapped up system down in the Gulf states. It actually also has a tropical system that it forms in the Caribbean and a south-southwest flow up the East Coast. And this type of setup, I mean, if I use my imagination and sort of move it forward, would probably mean for at least a good soaking rain, come days 11 and on. But again, I'm highly suspect with all of this. Where it's similar to the GFS, which is important in terms of the overall scheme of things, is the fact that the Pacific does break down quite a bit. You don't have that big storm out in the Pacific. You start to get a little bit more of a northwest flow in Canada, so that might be a sign of colder air coming down over time. But there's still a lot going on here on this particular European run that has me also highly suspect in terms of what it's going to mean in the long range. So this pattern change process just continues on. And again, I'm thinking, the second half of the month is going to be different than the first. We're seeing these cold shots continuing to come down in the eastern states. And if we look at the temperature anomalies, which I think is something, that's pretty important, let's take a look at that. So let's start back in the 24-hour period. And you can see that for much of this week, you go back from below normal to above normal. Then it gets much below normal for the weekend in the east into early next week. And in Canada, what happens is that gradually over time, the area of above normal temperatures shrinks. So that's also important. If we're going to change to a colder pattern here in the eastern states, we have to see Canada change, and it does change significantly over time. It goes from being above normal to near normal and below normal, especially as you go south into, south of 60 degrees north. So, we take a look at what's happening in the polar regions. You still have warmer than normal temperatures up here. So this is a sign of eventually cold air just getting displaced southward into the United States, if this is correct. So we'll keep watching to see what happens. Don't forget to make sure you check out the latest posts on meteorologistjoechaffee.com, local weather on weatherlongisland.com, and nycweathernow.com. And, of course, when there are storms around, ssstormchasers.com.